I married Richard thinking I had found peace. He was stable, kind, and said all the right things. But after the wedding, life became a quiet routine. He buried himself in work, often forgetting dinner, anniversaries, or just simple conversations. I began to feel like a piece of furniture in my own home, necessary but invisible. Then Ethan moved in. Richard's son from his first marriage. A college junior, tall, quiet, always polite. Our first few weeks under the same roof were awkward. He stayed in his room mostly, earbuds in, barely speaking. I didn't expect much more than silent coexistence. But slowly, that changed. It started on a Thursday. I made a new recipe, a creamy chicken dish I'd been excited about. Richard had promised he'd be home early, but as usual, I sat alone at the table with two untouched plates. I stood, frustrated, and called upstairs to Ethan, half joking, "You hungry? Come taste this and tell me if I've lost my touch." He looked surprised when he came down. "Taste test?" he asked with a grin. I handed him a fork, and he gave an exaggerated nod of approval. We laughed. For a moment it felt warm, human, not like the cold silence that usually filled the space. After that, our interactions changed slightly. He started asking how my day was. Sometimes he'd compliment a dish, or bring in the groceries without being asked. He still gave me space, but I noticed the difference. I noticed him. One evening, I found myself waiting for Ethan to come down for dinner, not Richard. That realization struck me harder than I expected. What was I doing? Craving attention from my stepson? But it wasn't like that, I told myself. It was just nice to be seen. That's all. Richard didn't notice. Not the meals. Not the laughter. Not the way I stopped wearing perfume around him. He was too busy. Too tired. Too checked out. I used to wait up for him, but now I went to bed early, hoping for dreamless sleep. Hoping to forget that I felt more like a housekeeper than a wife. One night, Ethan left a note in the kitchen. "Thanks for dinner. It was really good." Just a few words, scribbled on a napkin. I stood there staring at it for minutes. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't romantic. But it was more than I had received from Richard in weeks. It scared me how much it meant. I told myself again, he's just being kind. But part of me wondered, was I imagining the lingering looks? The long silences that felt loaded? Or was something shifting quietly between us? I didn't have an answer. Not then. But I knew this. Someone had finally said thank you. And I had felt it. Really felt it. And suddenly, that emptiness I had buried so deep started to rise. He started staying longer in the kitchen after meals, drying dishes while we talked. Our conversations drifted from shallow topics to deeper ones: books, dreams, disappointments. He asked questions no one else ever bothered to ask. Not even Richard. I found myself answering without hesitation, as if I had waited for someone to finally listen. Ethan told me he sometimes felt like he didn't belong in either of his parents' lives. That he was always trying to fit in without ever being seen. I understood that too well. I told him I once dreamed of opening a bakery, but gave it up when life demanded stability. He said, "You still could," and the way he said it made me feel 15 years younger. Little things changed. He started noticing when I wore something new or when I looked tired. He'd offer to help, even with the smallest things, like reaching for something on the top shelf. It was thoughtful, not forward. And yet, every small gesture filled the space that had been empty for so long. One night, the power went out. We sat in the dim light from the fireplace, wrapped in blankets. I made tea, and we talked for hours. It was calm, peaceful. He asked me if I ever felt alone. I said yes, more than I wanted to admit. He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, like he'd always known. There was a moment, just a moment, when our eyes locked too long. The silence thickened. My heart pounded. I looked away first and said something about needing to check the candles. He stood up too quickly, bumping into the table. We both laughed nervously, pretending we hadn't noticed what almost happened. But we had. The next morning I avoided him. Guilt crept in, even though nothing had been said or done. It was the thought that scared me. I kept reminding myself of the roles we played, me, the stepmother, him, the young man just passing through. But those lines had blurred when I wasn't paying attention. I tried to focus on Richard, to be the wife I thought he needed. But he barely looked up from his phone during dinner. When I told him I had been feeling off lately, he muttered something about scheduling a doctor's appointment. I didn't bother pushing further. The wall between us had become permanent. Ethan, on the other hand, noticed the change. "Everything okay?" he asked one afternoon. I lied and said I was just tired. But he saw right through it. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. That evening, I sat in my room, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. She looked tired, yes, but there was something else, something aching to feel alive again. I couldn't tell if it was desire, loneliness, or simply the hunger for connection. Whatever it was growing stronger, and I no longer knew how to ignore it. Our anniversary came, and I spent the entire day preparing. I cooked Richard's favorite meal, wore the red dress he once said made me look radiant, even lit candles. By 8, he still hadn't arrived. No text. No call. I sat alone at the table, the food growing cold and the silence weighing heavier than ever. When the door finally opened, it was Ethan. He paused when he saw everything set up, then noticed the untouched food and the expression on my face. I stood up quickly, embarrassed, trying to brush it off. "He probably got caught up at work," I said, voice flat. Ethan didn't say anything. He just walked over, gently pulled out a chair, and sat down. "You shouldn't waste this," he said, nodding toward the dishes. I gave a small, tired smile. "I was excited to try something new tonight," I murmured, handing him a plate. He took a bite, looked at me, and said, "This is incredible." His sincerity hit me harder than I expected. I sat across from him, unsure of what came next. There was no loud confession, no dramatic exchange. Just two people sitting in the silence, both feeling abandoned in different ways. He said softly, "You don't deserve to be forgotten." I felt my throat tighten. No one had said anything like that to me in years. The room felt warmer, closer, like the air had thickened. I looked at him, and he looked back. Not with lust. With something heavier. Understanding. Need. Loneliness. It wasn't premeditated. It wasn't even spoken. But it happened. And the worst part? It didn't feel wrong in the moment. It felt like release. Like breathing after being underwater for too long. When it was over, neither of us moved for a long time. The reality hit me first, crashing down like a tidal wave. I stood up without a word, rushed to the sink, and washed my hands like it would make any difference. Ethan remained seated, silent, staring at the floor. There was no fixing it. No undoing what had just occurred. He left that night. I don't know where he went, but he was gone before morning. I found a small note on the hallway table. "I'm sorry." That was it. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything. I crumpled it in my hand and sat down on the stairs, shaking. The guilt came fast. Loud. Unforgiving. I avoided mirrors. Avoided Richard. I moved through the house like a ghost. I had always imagined betrayal as something others did, something loud and scandalous. But mine was quiet. Personal. It didn't destroy everything immediately. It simply poisoned the silence. I didn't know what Ethan would do next, or if he'd ever come back. But I knew I couldn't hide from the truth. Something in me had cracked, and now the pieces no longer fit the way they used to. I wasn't the woman I thought I was. I wasn't sure I even knew who that woman had been. Ethan didn't come back that week. The house felt colder, heavier, like every corner knew what had happened. Richard noticed the shift in my mood, but he didn't ask. Maybe he was too distracted. Or maybe he just didn't care enough anymore to dig deeper. Either way, it suited me. The less said, the better for now. I busied myself with meaningless tasks. Cleaning drawers that didn't need cleaning. Folding laundry that wasn't mine. Trying to erase the memory with routine. But nothing worked. I could still feel the look in Ethan's eyes. The way it lingered. I told myself it had been a mistake. One moment of weakness. A need to feel human again. But when you repeat something in your head too many times, it stops sounding true. Then, one evening, Richard came home earlier than usual. We ate dinner in silence until he casually mentioned that Ethan had called him. My hands froze mid-cut. He said he needed space, Richard said, sipping his drink. Did he say anything to you before he left? I shook my head quickly, lying without blinking. He seemed quiet lately, I added. Richard shrugged. He's young. Probably sorting things out. Then he moved on, talking about work. I nodded and smiled in the right places, pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. He had no idea, and I hated how easy it was to keep him in the dark. 2 days later, I got a text from Ethan. Just 5 words. Can we talk? Just talk. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Tomorrow. Afternoon. When he arrived, I saw the same guilt on his face that had consumed me for days. But also something else, resolve. We sat across from each other, the weight of the past days pressing down. He spoke first. I shouldn't have let it happen. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Least of all you. I nodded. I know. Me too. He hesitated, then asked, Do you regret it? I looked away before answering. I regret the timing. The way. But not the truth of it. That truth being, we were both deeply lonely people who found something forbidden but real in each other. It didn't excuse it. It just explained it. I'm leaving for good, he said. I think it's best. I felt something in me collapse, but I didn't stop him. I knew he was right. Whatever had happened couldn't happen again. The damage was already enough. Before he left, he turned to me and said, You deserve more than being invisible. Then he walked out, leaving behind silence and finality. Richard never found out. Life went on, at least on the surface, but something in me was permanently altered. I no longer waited for his attention. I no longer asked for more. I accepted that I had been a chapter in someone else's story and a footnote in my own. But in that brief, impossible moment, I had been seen. And now, I would have to live with the cost of that clarity for the rest of my life.